All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Sandy Moose, and I have a PhD in economics, and I'm a former member of the Graduate School Alumni Association Council. And I am delighted to be here and to introduce Rebecca Henderson, who has a degree in economics too, though hers is in business economics, and don't ask me, many more years more recent than mine. But she's also the John and Natty McArthur University professor, and she is also a friend. John McArthur was a former colleague of mine on a couple of boards. We served on the board of Roman Haas, which is a specialty chemical company in Philadelphia, and AES, a power generation company in Washington, D.C. And John was so thrilled when Rebecca was going to be his first John and Natty McArthur professorship. He was just delighted. He was so excited. He said, "Sandy, you have to meet her." And so John arranged for us to get together for dinner. And I have to say, I am most grateful for John bringing us together. So I feel delighted, especially delighted to be here to introduce Rebecca. In addition, she is a university professor at Harvard, and she's a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. And she is a member of both, go ahead. She's a member of both the British Academy and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And she has spent 25 years serving on public company boards. Her research focuses on how the private sector can play a leading role in building a more sustainable and equitable economy. She has authored several books on the topic, and one of the more recent ones, I don't know if it is the most recent, but I remember receiving it and reading it, was Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire, which was shortlisted for the Financial Times and McKinsey Business Book of the Year Award. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca to begin her presentation on Reweaving Ourselves, Learning to Lead with Love and Power. And I'm most intrigued by the title. So thank you, Rebecca, for spending time with us, and we look forward to your presentation. Thanks and welcome.
Sandy, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. So it is a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for taking time to come to this talk on a beautiful spring afternoon when you could be out lying underneath a cherry tree. So thank you very, very much. I'd like to begin with a bit of introductions. So if you'd humor me, could you turn to someone near you who you don't know and tell them two things? You should probably take turns, but tell them two things. One is your name. And the second thing is, why did you come to a presentation called, I love people who are keen to get in. Come on in. Why did you come to this presentation? Why did you come to a presentation called Leading with Love and Power? So just a few minutes, introduce yourself, and why are you here? Why did you come to this presentation? I worked that out. So if you could wrap up. So thank your partner. Thank your partner. And I'd love to get a sense of some of the answers. So Michael says, you're here because you're optimistic.
Well, compared to the other session, but as you know,
well, as will be.
I teach in a business school, and leaders need to access anything they can these days.
Anything they can, because it's such a difficult time. I think that sounds exactly right to me. So why are you here? You're optimistic, you're curious. Why love and power?
We need some optimism.
You need some optimism. So you have a sense, I'm going to be optimistic. Okay, is that the general sense of the room? Is you came for a dose of optimism? Yeah. Well, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is I'm not going to talk about optimism. The good news is I am going to talk a bunch about hope. And I don't think it's realistic to be optimistic in the sense of, don't worry, everything is going to be okay, because that's clearly not the case, right? We're facing major interlinked series of emergencies. The technical term is polycrisis. Yes, so in addition to global heating, in addition to ecosystem degradation and instabilization, in addition to the decline of democracy, in addition to massive polarization, in addition to the threat of what kind of war we're not kind of sure, in addition to the concentration of wealth, in addition to the terrible things that are happening to our young people and mental health and social isolation, we're losing hope. And of course, that's part of the goal. So the systematic cultivation of fear is one of the ways autocrats stay in power. So it's very important to talk about hope and why there is every reason to be hopeful and every reason to work for hope. Because I always think when people say they're optimistic, there's that sense of, oh, someone will fix it. No one will fix it. We're not going back to what we had. We have to move through this to something different and hopefully better. One of my friends says the secret of this moment is we have to persuade people we can throw a better party. There is a better way to structure things. Many people are very unhappy all over the world right now. Modernity has worked beautifully for those of us fortunate and privileged enough to have Harvard educations, beautiful lives, many choices. But for billions of people, it has not worked that well at all. And so this is a moment to buckle down and work, as well as be hopeful. So why love? I still find it weird to say love in this kind of room. As Sandy so kindly let you know, I have a PhD in economics from Harvard. She didn't mention, I don't think, I have an engineering degree from MIT. I'm a mechanical engineer. And I don't think there was much mention of love at MIT when I was there. Hardly ever, yes, right. Although, I was going to say, there's a lot of love in that institution. A lot of love in that institution. So why love? I'm going to tell you a story about a major mistake in my life and how it led me to love. So let's see, where to begin? I spent my first 20 years at MIT in the business school, teaching and researching about why large firms and large organizations and indeed social systems have trouble changing. So I became one of the world's experts on why large firms get big, fat and lazy and have trouble doing new things. A taxi driver once said to me, could I get a PhD from Harvard for discovering that? I mean, large firms get fat and lazy and you don't do much. I said, well, it's very complicated, very nuanced, there's a lot going on. But essentially the taxi driver was right? Large firms get stuck in their ways. They become very successful. It's difficult to change. I spent 3 months of my life trying to persuade Nokia that Apple was a threat. Totally without success. So that was the kind of firm I worked with, and that's what I did. And about 17, 18 years ago, energy companies started showing up in my office saying, we can see the world is changing. We need to do the energy transition. You're supposed to be an expert on change. How do we move from fossil fuels to renewables? And that got me focused on climate change. And that's been a major focus of my work for the last 17, 18 years. About 16 years ago, I was recruited to the business school to help fund the Business and Environment Initiative. And I started teaching a course called Reimagining Capitalism, Business and the Big Problems. So some of you are old enough to remember when we really thought that sustainable business could do it. That we could really move business, we could change the metrics, we could persuade business that if they were skillful and purpose-driven, they could make a big difference on big public problems and make money at the same time. So that was my life. That's been my life for the last, as I say, 16, 17, 18 years. I published a book in April 2020 called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. And it was about how business can address problems like inequality, by treating employees with dignity and respect, giving them decent wages, running high trust organizations, how they could address problems like equity and racial injustice by systematically evaluating people on the basis of merit and making sure that subconscious bias was at a minimum in large organizations, how they could address problems like climate change by building new battery plants and reducing carbon use. You probably know this, but Walmart reduced their carbon use by over 40% on a net present value positive basis the whole way down. So there were all these wonderful cases and stories. We have more than 300 cases at the business school about how business can do good and make money. And I published the book and I was so excited. So excited. So it's April of 2020. Anyone remember what's happening in April of 2020? So my book tour went down the tubes, right? I thought, oh dear, no book tour. Oh, this is going to be a disaster. But it turned out that publishing a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire was a brilliant strategic move when the world was actually on fire. And everyone was on Zoom. So my first couple of Zooms, I talked to more than 20,000 people. Hundreds of people. Thousands of people, tens of thousands of people wanted to hear about reimagining capitalism. The book hit the bestseller list, in the real one, in Japan and South Korea, big success in South America, pretty good in Europe, quite good in Africa, India, sold the rights in China. It's still not out there. There is some mention of democracy in the book, which I guess is why it's still not published. I mean no disrespect for those of you from China, forgive me, but it's quite aggressive on why democracy and growth are connected. And I was giving all these talks, and I was finally in the room. This is a professor's dream, right? Finally, you're talking to the people with the decision rights who can make a difference. I was giving all these talks. It was so great. It was so great. And then I realized I had made a huge mistake. I had assumed that if you showed people that there was a business case for change, that destabilizing the climate and the environmental system was really fundamentally bad for business, and that if they developed new business models and cooperated with each other, and if we redid finance so we addressed systemic risk, if you showed them that that would mean we could save the planet and our society, that they would do it. Like, what was I thinking? I'd spent the first 20 years of my career studying change in large organizations. I knew that no one changes if you just give them the business case. That the business case is a necessary but wildly insufficient thing. People change when they have to. Nearly going bankrupt, wonderful, wonderful stimulus for change. Think of what happened at IBM. Or because they deeply believe they want to. Not because the business case is there. Because they think that they care about their communities or their employees, or it's a really cool technology, or they can really make a difference. Every large firm I had worked with that had fundamentally changed had changed because they were purpose-driven, not profit-driven. And I'd mentioned purpose in the book, mumble, 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 but it was kind of low-key. And I hadn't mentioned that if all the stories in the book, and there are some great stories, every one of those CEOs was deeply purpose-driven and, wait for it, fundamentally motivated by love, not by money. I'd forgotten that. I'd made the basic professor's mistake, which is give them a beautifully worked out, well, all right, okay worked out case for change. And they would go, my God, Rebecca, you're right. Let me just do it. I mean, how neurotic is that? That's not how the world works. So then it got worse. I realized that we weren't going to see the changes we need. And you remember the growing realization over the last few years, those of you who work in sustainability, follow climate, work in inequality, work in social justice. Do you remember that time when we thought it could be done? I remember it. It doesn't feel like that now, right? And that growing realization that we as a society are not going to suddenly wake up and do it. We are just not. And we could talk about why. But it's not going to happen. So I got very depressed. I quit work. And I thought, what do we do? What do we do? We need a worldwide spiritual revival and turn to love. And I'm an economist and an engineer, and that is a wacky idea. So I went on retreat. I'd been a nominal Buddhist for years, but actually started sitting in silent retreat. Because I thought, like, what are you going to do? You know, we're not going to do it with our cognitive, verbal, rational minds. That's not what's going to do it. We need to wake up to the fact that the purpose of being human is human flourishing, not maximizing status, wealth, and power. That those were always means to an end, not an end in themselves. And of course, we have built a system where those most oriented to status, wealth, and power end up with most of it. And unfortunately, the human brain does not respond well to enormous amounts of wealth and being ringed by courtiers. Weird stuff starts to happen, right? So now we've got very strange political dynamics. And here's the good news, a deep, deep sense that something is wrong. Like, really wrong. So 3 years ago, I wouldn't dare say love in a public forum. 2 years ago, I said, well, you know, there are multiple goals available to the human being and we could rebalance. And now I say, we gotta turn to love. It's the only way. And then in the following sentence, I say, but not love alone. Love alone, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who was cribbing them from Paul Tillich, is weak and anemic. It's gotta be love and power. So what does that mean? So that's what I want to talk about. And to start, I want to talk a little bit more about this love thing. Like, what the hell is love anyway? So I need 8 volunteers willing to read a few lines of poetry out loud. Could you please put up your hands if you're up for this? Yep. Okay. I got 2 at the back. Yay. Brilliant. Who else is up for this? You got... Oh, I got a reverend. I trust you to do the reading. I got one here. I got one here. Wait. What number do you have? Oh, I see what the problem is. You're 5. Okay, I need 3 more volunteers in the front 2 rows. Thank you, and 1 more. Okay, so volunteers, you will be reading the poem. Everybody else gets a copy. So can I have a couple of volunteers help me hand this out? Mike, would you help me get this to the back of the room? I've got this to the front. But the volunteers have special copies. Thanks. Let's get these out. Can you pass these down? Pass these down. Everyone here got a copy? Thank you. Okay. Everyone got a copy? Okay. So here's what's going to happen. The volunteers have numbered paragraphs. So at the back, you have 1 and 2, yes? Okay, so what we're going to do is, you wait for this, read the paragraphs in order. So keep watching, and when the first 2 paragraphs are read, if you're number 3, you know who you are, you read the 3rd paragraph. Yes? We're good? Everyone, can we just see who's number 1? Who's 2? Who's 3? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Brilliant. Take it away.
She was on tour with me. because I'd always preferred long distance, and I'd finally grown wise enough to know never to trust my preferences. Driving to a show one day, we realized the venue where I'd be performing was only 30 minutes from her parents' home. I hadn't met them yet and wasn't sure I ever would when, out of nowhere, they called and asked her to add them to the guest list. One tear sprinted down her cheek like it was running to a mailbox to open a letter it had been waiting for 700 years. As for me, I vomited in my mouth and swallowed it like a champ.
It had been 2 decades since she came out.
Wait.
2 decades. Whoops. Thank you. It had been 2 decades since she came out, 2 decades since her heart was something they had sincerely asked about. She grew up in the rural South, 5 sisters and no telephone. Her father would have to sprint down the road to her grandpa's house to take a call about a job. Before hearing that, I hadn't known it was possible to work in oil and gas and not be rich. Imagined him breaking his neck, or his back, maybe both, on an oil rig in the Gulf Coast, but really didn't have a clue what he actually did. She didn't have a clue what inspired them to want to come, but I suspected they'd heard the word poetry and thought, that's gay in a good way. From the closet stanza ing about a shaft of summer grass, longing for only dogwood trees and lily pads.
What I was certain of was that they weren't coming because they knew I'd ended my last show with a poem about how churchyard sales are secretly the best place to buy dildos. Right before showtime, she ran into the green room to tell me they'd arrived. Her smile a jump rope stretched from one side of the room to the other. Her breath leaping up and down in a giddy celebration. They're here. They're actually here. The two of us were like a team in a huddle right before the most important game of our queer lives, when a group walked in with a flyer for a protest, asking me to announce the details on the mic. It was a protest organized urgently to stop fracking in the state. Yes, of course, I said, tucking the flyer into a pocket with my set list. Then I saw the jump rope of my girlfriend's smile drop.
What's wrong? I asked. Honey, fracking is why my dad has a job. She said, what? I can't not announce the protest. I told her, I know. She said, it would be a crime against my conscience. She said, I know, heart becoming the Titanic sinking to the bottom of the sea. When I stepped on stage, her father was the first person I spotted. He was impossible to miss. A lumberjack in a forest of asymmetrical haircuts that looked even more asymmetrical next to her parents' straight backs, straight as telephone poles. And me, desperate for lines that could reach them.
Resting the flyer for the protest at my feet so I could announce it near the end, I told myself, if you're going to do anything in the world tonight, you better be lightning. You better find something in you honest enough to strike them. For 75 minutes, I spoke about nothing but love. How everything but I love you is small talk. How their daughter was the only person in the world sweet enough to always call me honey. How the first time we shared a bed, she lay down with her arms tight at her side, like a mummy, so terrified she was to love something and lose it again.
When the show was near its end, I looked down at the flyer and back at them. I'd say the moment lasted a lifetime, but no one lives that long. I could see the protest organizers in the audience waiting. I could see their faith in my politics and what they were sure about to march from my lips, while I remembered the one tear that raced down my girlfriend's face. One tear with guts enough to hope. The look in her eyes when she ran into the green room, belting, "They're here, they're here."
I walked off the stage without saying a word against drilling the heart out of the earth. I walked up to the green room, a hypocrite, a failed activist with my face in my hands on the couch. When her father burst through the door, his head nearly axing a hole through the ceiling. Tears, like a giant's tears, covering his face. I'm 76 years old, he said, and I just tonight figured out what love is.
There is no moral of this story. There is only light and sadness. There is no moral of this story. It's just a moment in my life where I did something wrong, and the earth, who has never not known what love is, held me anyway.
So if you would, take a moment with someone you don't know in the room and talk a little bit about what this poem says to you about love. Oh, thank you. Okay, let's bring it back together. So what do we learn from this? What do you learn? What do you take away? What does it tell us about love, if anything? Ruth? Let's get you a mic. Do we have mics? But I think it's being recorded, so this is your moment of fame. To Ruth, please.
You have to make choices when you love a lot. You love your parents, you love your wife, you love the earth, and you have to make choices. What's more important at a particular point in time? You have to choose sometimes.
You sometimes have to choose. It's something that really comes rolling out of the poem, right? Love sometimes involves choices.
And very hard ones.
And very hard choices. Lovely, thank you. Good.
And unexpected.
Unexpected choices. Things you don't think, it puts you in places you didn't expect to be in. What else? What else is in this poem? This gentleman in the center.
Well, it makes me think of the relationship between love and power, too, because she's in a moment of power where she has the stage and the attention. And sometimes the thing to do is to leverage that power against your own interest, perhaps, or against something you do care about because you feel love for someone else, even someone you don't know, the parents. And the reason it's love, that it's an action, is because you have to make that you're making that sacrifice. If it didn't cost you anything, it wouldn't really be an act of love.
The reason it's love is because you're making the sacrifice. So sometimes love asks for tough questions, and sometimes love lets you make the choices, supports you as you make the choices. It's beautiful. Thank you. Anything else that leaps out for you? Does the poem feel loving? Do you get a sense of her, that sort of deep love? I love that line, I better be lightning. For the next 75 minutes, I talked about love in every way I could. So what does love do for us? Imagine for a moment that, let's see, 30% of the world's population decided to recenter their lives on love. What would that be? What would that do? Why would that help? We'll make it an active, engaged middle 30%, okay? So a useful 30%. Why might it be helpful? Michael?
It also does depend on what the other 70% is.
Always. But just, okay, let me try something different. Why might it be useful for any single person to turn to love? Let's think about this for a moment. Why love? Oh, the drawback of whiteboards. Why love? So I'm going to suggest the first reason to turn to love. And what do I mean by turning to love? Great question. So I have something very specific in mind. I think as a culture, huge generalization coming up, are you ready? As a culture, we have over-indexed on cognition and rationality and power. And so we are leading our lives as if we are, one of my friends described it as in the red zone. Maybe you don't do this, but I did it for many years. We're living in the red zone. We're focused on what we need. We have the plan. We are running all the time. We are totally focused. We've got this down. You remember being in that place? I'm sure everyone in this room is there sometimes, right? So we're hanging out in the red zone. It's all about goals and achievement, and it can feel really good, yes? Really good to be there and doing it well. The trouble with spending too much time up here is you come home at the end of the day, forgive me, I come home at the end of the day and I fall into the blue-black zone. Anyone familiar with this one? This is numbing. This is despair. This is like trying to check out. Let somebody else do it. And in some ways, we, and by we, I mean the privileged, those of us of privilege in the global north, educated, resources, we are oscillating between the red zone and the blue-black zone. And this is way too simple, but my reading of one of the reasons so many of the young people are unhappy is this is no way to live. I mean, this is it. I get all these degrees, and if I get a job, and I'm not sure I'll get a job, I'm just going to work like a dog and then hit the gray-black zone. And if I'm not privileged, if I am not fortunate enough to have education, social capital, resources, I am doing this because I have to. Because I'm working 2-3 jobs, there is no space, there is no time, I have no resources, I have no time to spend with my community. I'm just doing this. And, you know, we all know, I can't say things like that as an academic. Many of you are probably aware that there is an intermediate state. Sometimes it's called flow, sometimes it's called calm, sometimes it's called centering, sometimes it's called simply grounding, right? You remember those moments, those of you who have small children or grandchildren or pets, when you stop and have tea, when things go really well, when you let yourself go, when you center. And this feels really good. And it's a much more effective place to operate from. But you don't just hope it shows up. Here's the issue. Why talk about love? Because we can train to get to this state. The psychologists talk about inner development, turning internally. Some of you may have heard of the inner development goals, which is a Swedish, who would have guessed, organization of thousands of global psychologists trying to help people more access this state more. There are many ways to access it, from Tai Chi, to sitting in circle, to ecstatic dance, to prayer, to meditation. Humans for tens of thousands of years have thought being able to self-regulate. This is self-regulation. This is not reacting. This is holding the terrible news that comes at you with peace. This is an accessible state to most human beings. Funnily, in many ways, it's more accessible now in some marginalized communities where there's still a sense of the transcendence and a deeper sense of community, because this is so much easier to do if you do it in a group. right? Churches at their best, teams at their best, classrooms at their best. If you're self-regulating, I self-regulate. If you're operating with love and deep listening and care, it's much easier for me to do so. So this is both an individual process and a group process. And I spent about a year of my 2 years on leave discovering that, like, this is a thing. Like, millions of people for thousands of years have known this is a thing. It's just if you have an engineering degree from MIT and you went to the most aggressive high school in England and then you did your PhD and then you ran because you wanted tenure and you ran and you ran and you ran. You know, it wasn't a bad life. I'm not complaining. Lots of good stuff, but not much peace. You know, with my children, of course. So there's an individual thing going on here. But the individual thing then flows into a group thing. I don't know if this is true for you, but for many years when I ran meetings, I would walk in and go, "Nice to see you. Okay, what's first on the agenda?" Anyone else ever do that? Like, you know, we're not kidding around here. I'm going to get things done. It turns out there are better ways to run groups and organizations and families and schools and societies. This thing that I never had time for, you know, like, well, and how are you, Steve? And meaning it. This thing called deep listening.
Thanks for
asking. This thing called deep listening. I assume several of you know what deep listening is, but you know this revolutionary technique? Incredible technique. Okay. Michelle, pleasure to meet you. Tell me. You don't have to do it. Say anything. What do you really value? What is it you really value? Or tell me about where you come from. Or tell me why you love this community. Yeah? And deep listening is, this is hard, at least I found it very hard in the beginning. You listen as Michelle speaks, instead of thinking about what you're going to say next. Serious self-discipline required, right? I really listen. It's one of the greatest gifts you can give another human being. One of the problems with our current moment is very few people feel anyone is listening to them ever, right? And then she listens to me. And then we wait. And depending on how you're running the technique, you don't say, well, that was a really weird thing you said. I mean, like, whoa, I'm glad I'm not doing that. You hold with love and respect. I'm talking about basics here. For some of you, this will be super basic. But learning to build a container, and what's a container? A container is a space in which people feel they can say a little bit more of what they really think. A little bit more. And they can laugh together, and they can share together. And it turns out, if you can get groups of people working this way, they work much more effectively. A good chunk of my scholarly work is about what's called high commitment work organizations. And it turns out that if you can run an organization and treat people with dignity and respect and build trust and listen, much more agile, much more invested, much more engaged, off the charts performance. So this is all good, yeah? Feeling good? So I have bad news. It's kind of good news too. So you build one of these organizations. 2 pieces of bad news. First, you have to invest. It's not like you can stand up in the front of the room, and I'm not making this up, I've seen this. Okay, the consultant tells me I should listen to everyone and we should try and tell the truth and I should treat you with dignity and respect. So that's what we're going to do. Going on, I hear that will raise profits. I'm totally in. No. You have to do it. And that's emotionally, like you have to have done your own work, right? If you're up here all the time, it's hard, right? So I'm asking something tough. It's not that you can just announce it and have it happen. Second piece of slightly bad news. Performance improves, great, fantastic. No guarantee profits will increase. Why not? Anyone guess? You start doing all this work, you start, making it a better place to work, you start bringing people, whole person, you're really doing the thing, you're really embodying love in the institution. No guarantee profits go up. Why not? Oh, nice, Michelle. Will you get good strategic alignment? It turns out this is key. Really, there are two reasons. And the first reason is if you simply generate a happy workplace, what you get is a happy workplace. If you don't redesign the strategy of the firm and align it with the new capacities you're evoking in the people who work for you, you get nowhere. The global leader on this is Professor Zeynep Ton at MIT. And there are lots of great people. I'm just calling her out because she's a friend and she's only 10 minutes away and she's great. Okay, so I don't want to suggest everyone else in the area is not great doing this kind of work. So what Zeynep, have I lost my, I have. Sorry. Zeynep Ton. What Zeynep discovered, as others have discovered, but she has beautiful case studies, and I really recommend you to her work, is that if you simply do all this good stuff and don't change the structure of the business, what you do is invest. You have to spend a lot of time, right? You have to really put yourself on the line. You have to run these meetings. You have to build these containers, And if you don't restructure work to take advantage of the energy that's released, you don't get where you need to go. And restructuring work is things like delegating power, making sure you have teams. This is the structure you need to run the Toyota production system, is the ability to have real conversations about hard things again and again and again. Because I may be giving you the picture that an organization or a schoolroom or a hospital run this way is sort of nirvana where people are floating through their days all the time. No. That really gets you nowhere. No, this is if learning to disagree really productively and if. So sometimes, if we're lucky, we have moments of this in our families, I love you dearly, but I really think that how we're treating our son right now is a bad thing. And you can really talk about it, and that's what makes a good family, right? That's what makes for effectiveness. So you need an organization that can sustain the benefits of having those conversations. So delegate power, high levels of communication. What's your strategy? It better be about innovation and change and responsiveness to customers, because if you're just, running the same old, you're not going to get anywhere. So what I'm highlighting in micro, I hope in a way that is helpful, is it's not simply a matter of love one another right now. That is key, but it's got to be implemented in institutions and processes, in metrics, right? If you put in a system like this and then you still keep measuring on quarterly reports on the old metrics, you're not going to get what you want. So at the micro level, or you could call it the meso level, you've got to change the structure of the organization so that power and love are in constant dialogue. Am I making sense? I think this is a good moment for questions. You're all looking at me like super thoughtfully. I'm summarizing like 10 years of research in, 10 minutes, so.
Well, an organization
has
to change.
And you have to
Family is a good example.
Right.
You can't have the same dynamic when the children are 8 years old and when they're 14 years old.
I want a mic because we want to record this. Can I have the mic, please? So, Steve, you were saying that you have to change the organization if you're going to change the way people relate to each other.
Right, because you
You've
have
got
to change very, very fundamental things about the structure of the organization. If you're giving an example of the family,
right?
The goals are different when they're 4 years old and 8 years old, 14, 16. and 20,
and
30.
I love that analogy because essentially that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about us all growing up and really treating each other from the heart and accepting as our goal human flourishing and the good of the whole, not me, 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 me. Right. And the good news is potentially a much better way to live. The bad news is announcing it tomorrow is not going to do it, right? This is a hard thing I'm talking about. A hard thing. It's a hard thing just at a school. I have friends who are school superintendents, school principals trying to do this in classrooms. It's hard. Why is it hard? One of the reasons it's hard is the whole superstructure around every organization, the deep cultural beliefs about how you behave and what you value run counter to this, right? So that voice inside me, you may not have this, but I have it, which is this love stuff is weak and anemic, better put on the red leather jacket so they know you're a power player. No, seriously. You know, and the board is managing me for short-term returns, and I say I'm going to do this great new thing, and it's going to be fantastic, and they say, thank you, you'll enjoy your next job. Yeah? So the whole context has to change as well. So I'm teaching a course called Reweaving Ourselves in the World, which is an attempt to begin to explore what this kind of transition might actually look like and where it might come from. And it takes graduate students from every professional school at Harvard, except so far we haven't had any dentists. But not sure why the dentists haven't showed up yet. But law, politics, public health, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, engineering, business, government, divinity, pretty amazing. And the question on the table is, okay, if you're going to move the whole civilization, how do you do that? So you ready for the answer in 6 minutes? Because then I'm going to stop for Q&A. Here it is in 6 minutes. I love being a college professor. It's great. First, have to work on yourself first. So if you can't stand at least some of the time in this place, you're not going to be able to help other people stand there either. There's many, many different ways to work on your inner dimension. What we're talking about is sometimes called cultivation. Cultivating yourself for patience, cultivating wisdom, cultivating yourself for your deepest values. The best elements of the faith traditions have focused on it for thousands of years. You can do it in psychology. You can do it with Tai Chi. Many, many different ways to do it. If you're curious, I have a technical note outlining many different techniques with the scientific references suggesting that these are effective. Step 1. Step 2, do that with friends. Much easier if you have a community around you that's trying to make a similar shift, that's holding you accountable. If you're familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous as an organization, the way they help people really change, to your point, is a small group. They have an assigned mentor to everyone who is trying to change. So you have a personal mentor. I call Steve and I say, I'm walking by a bar, I need help. And Steve's been there himself. He helps me through it. So we know that everything is easier if the people around you are also trying to do it. That's basic social psychology. So work on yourself, find a group of friends who are trying to make the same kinds of investments. Step 3, attempt incremental change where you are, where you have your sweet spot and your joy. Whether it's a hospital or a school or a business or you're in media, what can you do where you are? And if the answer is absolutely nothing, I'm in something totally toxic, explore finding something else. Because what I'm talking about is happening everywhere. Because the secret piece of good news I haven't shared with you is that this kind of transformation in a civilization, this kind of 100-year shift, doesn't happen if everything is going well. It happens when you get up against the limits of the old way of thinking about things, and we're like, whoa, this is not working. And it's becoming increasingly clear all over the world that this is not working. Now, at the margins, right, if I am garbage picking in the slums of Delhi, it's been obvious to me for a while that it doesn't work very well. I found myself talking to a young man in an airport bus queue. You know how this happens, right? He was dressed like a Stanford MBA, and he taught like a Stanford MBA. And so I'm having the usual reimagining capitalism. You can make money. We just have to change the accounting standards. It's going to be cool kind of conversation. And just for fun, because it's a bus queue, I start to get a little aggressive, and I say, I've really got interested in love, and I really think there's fundamentally wrong with our entire power structure, and I really think we need to rethink our civilization. And he is totally with me. Why is he totally with me? Because he's from Gaza. He knows. He knows. So that's the good news, right? So find a place where you can begin to make change. The technical term in the literature is building islands of coherence. Beginning to build a new way of operating so that other people can see it, experience it, and it's not just some fancy professor at the front of a room telling you it's possible. When you can touch it and feel it and see it and experience it, much easier. And I'm afraid my vision of the future for the next few years is not a rosy one. I think it's going to be rough. So it's going to get kind of bumpy. And we need these islands of coherence to be saying, we could try it this way. We could try it this way. Item number 5. Okay, we do need a massive social and political movement. Something like civil rights, something like the movement that restored democracy in Brazil. Humans have been in very bad places before and turned things around. And when you look carefully, when you pull apart the dynamics of how that happens, you learn 2 things. One is, it's all about local connection. It's all about local organizing. You know, sometimes people, when they look at the civil rights movement, they say, wow, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, I mean, he just stood up, he was such a great orator. No. He was building on 300 years of people talking and working and building community and trying to drive change. In Brazil, it took them 20 years, building at the union level, at the church level, at the community level, to really regain democracy. So that's what you learn. Like power, be strategic. Who are the levers? Who are you going after? How do you break open the elite? Lots of strategy to these social movements. And last but not least, lots of love. Because you're not going to try this if you don't think it's worth trying. If you don't value your children and the earth and your friends and your communities. We don't get these kinds of movements without love. So, I am not optimistic, but I am hopeful. My own experience has been that this turn in my own life has been like drinking clean, cold water. After years of drinking, chemical-laced soda. It's gorgeous. It's so much better. And humans are so inventive. And I've saved the best news for last. You know the best news? The problem is not technological. The problem is not even economic. The problem is we don't know the policies, don't have the technologies, or don't have the resources. We have all of those. We have to decide we want to use our wealth and our skills to build a genuinely flourishing world. And we could do that. We could do that. Not for sure, but we could. We really could. So I hope you'll join me for this urgent 100-year project. Got to start tomorrow. Thank you very much. So thank you. I have 15 minutes for questions because, hey, I love to talk, but I thought better if we get some discussion. Steve, you've already had a voice in the room, so get us going, and then we'll see.
Okay,
Yeah.
Could you comment on Indivisible?
Is that, there's still the group behind the King's March?
Yeah.
So, yes. So, it's fantastic to have people in the streets, but is wildly insufficient. You need yeah.
Shut down everything.
That's a different question, right? So a general social strike is a very interesting question. I think it's very ambitious as a target right now. If it were me, I would be starting with trying to build local chapters where people have conversations about their community and what would be better in their community and what they want to see in their community. I think we need to practice at a small level before we can imagine shutting the whole of the society down. Partly because there's at least 30% of the society that we know right now is not going to be keen on playing ball. And one of the reasons I gave you this poem, as much must have been obvious, is it is so tempting to hate the other side, at least for me. I mean, I think about what's happened in renewable energy. You know, this is an area I know well. The deliberate destruction of what's been happening, what's happening to the natural world. The fact that 40 million children go to bed hungry at least once a month in this country, and the cuts to the poor. I mean, I get so angry. But, like, it doesn't go anywhere. Anger is a motivation force, yes, but anger and hate, no. It's got to be anger, action, love. And so one of the things we have to learn to do is, this will be familiar for those of you from a certain religious tradition, love those who hate us. Dr. King was right. This is all about nonviolent action. It's all about love. This is the hard part, the really hard part. And that's going to take practice. Because if we do a strike now and approach it now, I think, this is just me, there'll be so much anger and rage out there. And, you know, us and them, and we got the right answer, and come to us. And I don't think that's what it's about. I think what it's about is we are off track. We see why you're so angry. And that's partly due to stuff that we did. Us, you know, rich East Coast intellectual types, right? Well, it wasn't so good what some of the Democratic administrations did. It's not so good. So I think we need deep listening at the local level and across as many boundaries as we can find. One of my colleagues here at Harvard, a professor called Danielle Allen in the government department, she ran an extraordinary conference here in December where she brought people from left and right on stage. And I don't know how she did it, but the criteria was clearly people who genuinely care about those at the bottom of society, whether you're left or right. And so we had panels on immigration, on wages, on social media, where the fundamental bedrock was, my goodness, what's happening to the children? My goodness, what's happening to the immigrants? My goodness, what's happening to those at the bottom of the income distribution? Now let's talk about solutions. And that's a completely different place to start, right? That kind of conversation. So I'm nervous about a general strike in the short term. I think it's way over-optimistic. I think we need to do the ground game. And I'm happy to share copies. Seriously, I'd be happy to share copies of the Brazil case I just finished, just because it talks about how long it takes to do that ground game and what it looks like. And we have some beautiful writing, some beautiful books that talk about this too. Happy to share. Can we put stuff up on a website where people can see it? Yeah, great. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful for me personally. So my wife and I both were in Boston for about 10 years, so I'm very familiar with the red zone and the blue-black zone. And then we moved to Rhode Island, where we're from. And when you said what state is between, that's why I thought Rhode Island, because the ambition is lower, right? And I think what I wonder is there a tension between ambition and the green flow? Like, because the people in Rhode Island and the people versus Boston are fundamentally different in terms of what they're driven by. And I wonder if we're trying to have our cake and eat it too, which is we want to drive profits, but we want to have love, right? So where do you feel like once people sort of have what they need emotionally, that's at odds with ambition and driving change? I wonder what you think about that tension.
As you know, that's a huge question. And you didn't ask, but I think I would add to your question, and what about consumption? You know, does this mean we actually have to have less stuff? And how do we think about that? So let me answer that question first, and then your first question, which is such a powerful one. So on the consumption question, I'm afraid so. Yeah. But we have to be very careful here, Because people like us, and I'm generalizing horribly, but in general, people who are fortunate enough to have been to Harvard and have good careers, we have a lot of stuff. And there are billions of people in the world who don't. So the consumption question has to be nuanced. You know, if you don't have enough to eat and a safe place to sleep and decent medical care and safety, I'm not talking to anyone about reducing consumption. So we can talk about rebalancing. The good news is when you look at measures of human flourishing as opposed to just GDP, you can see that, in fact, my colleague here, Taylor Vanderweel, who runs the Human Flourishing Initiative here at Harvard, the top of his table of most flourishing nation on earth is Indonesia. Egypt rates significantly above the US because you're including measures like community well-being, individual well-being, how hard you're working, a sense of meaning and purpose. So we know that we can reduce stuff consumption and not reduce overall happiness. And one of the key drivers of this is reducing inequality. Inequality is toxic on so many dimensions, because if you have the yacht and I'm living in a hut, my ability to I have a great community is much harder, right? So reducing inequality is going to be key, and that means, those of us fortunate enough to be at the top of the income distribution are going to have to share. Now, your deep question about whether if I over-focus on love, maybe I get lazy, maybe I'm less interested in growth. Okay, so I'm just making this up, all right? There is a kind of inner cultivation, focus on love, that is focus on self in another form. I don't know about you, but I have friends who've endlessly gone to yoga retreats and mushrooms and sat on cushions, and they're doing all this stuff, and they don't do anything. Right? So it becomes a way of just feeding yourself and taking care of yourself. And I would say that's not really what I'm talking about. The kind of love I'm talking about, and I don't want to give you the sense like I hang out there all the time, okay? But, I've met people who do. And wow, that is so focused on service and what can I do? That's the kind of love that says, as long as someone's hungry, I'm going to find a way to feed them. That's the kind of love that says, we have to find another way to do the energy transition. We have to find another way to fix the food system. And so I think there's a difference between just a general slowing down and a going in, and a real connection to what's happening in this moment and what it needs. So I want to be somewhere in between Rhode Island and Boston. No, I think the question is a great one. Great one. Yeah.
There's another, just to follow, there's a number of problems around that they seem intractable. There's been a bridge that's been broken for years, right? That they can't fix.
Right.
That is the culture. That's sort of what I'm asking. If there was more ambition, more driving, something wrong. And so that's the tension.
So I think at its best, power and love can be in conversation. Because we don't want to lose power. Power is what you use to solve problems and take care of those you love and do fantastic projects that change the world, which humans want to do. But it's directing that power so that it doesn't come at the expense of other members of the community or the natural world, which is so easy to see and say and so hard to do. Great question. Thank you.
A question about size of organizations. And because with modern technology, et cetera, it's possible to be effective in very small organizations. And the sort of motivation that you're talking about is so much easier to do in a small organization. So once I got off the US style faculty rat race, I ran a consulting company, 10 people in the firm. We did the projects that paid the bills, and then we went around the room and we did economic development projects in 40 different countries. And with a small number of people, you can get often people sharing a purpose. And one I'll say optimism, even if I dare to, is that while, there's a lot of criticism of younger generations, the younger generations are coming into the workforce looking for something that's meaningful, not just maximizing income. Yes. So while some projects, some things can probably only be solved in large scale with big organizations, are you starting to see space for smaller organizations operating the way you're talking about, just taking over more and more spaces? Because again, places like Indonesia, South Asia, et cetera, it's the micro enterprises community base that are making the biggest
making the difference. So I do agree this is much easier at small scales. But your question reminds me that I haven't really talked about the very large scale, which is how we organize our society. Because all of this will be easier if the rules that govern our society favor small organizations and slowing down and focusing on each other. So there's a big political agenda behind this, including, for example, you probably know this, but in some parts of the world, I happen to spend time in France sometimes, you cannot have a pharmacy that has more than 2 branches. You can't have a bookstore that has more than 2 branches. I had an earlier life when I was the government's witness in the Microsoft antitrust case. So I am all over industrial concentration and how toxic it is. And insert long conversation here about the AI concentration and how that's going to have to be addressed politically. Because at its best, AI could be an enabling tool for all these micro-organizations. It could break apart the scaling advantage, as long as the scaling advantage is not manifesting politically, right? Very large organizations, lots of money, infinite political spend, serious, serious problem. So paradoxically, this hope to build a slowed down, local, connected, empowered society has to go through breaking apart big power. And I'm afraid it has happened before, but it kind of looked like World War II. No, I'm serious. That's going to take a massive political shock, I think, which could be just, many years of empowered, connected, reaching out to people different from us, democratic administration to do. It's possible. We know what the policies are. But there's a link between that very big macro and what's possible micro. Yeah. Anyone have a 1-minute question? I see Sandy coming my way. She's coming to bring the hook.
I want to go back to your question about what happens if 30% of our population changes. What were your thoughts behind that question?
Oh, okay. So thank you. What a fun question. So here's my hope. And by the way, did you know imagination is a muscle? We need to practice our imagination. We have to practice imagining it could be better. I have a friend called Phoebe Tickell who runs an outfit called Moral Imaginations. That's what she does. She just supports groups in imagining what it could be like. So here's my imagination. 30% of every community has gone deep, and they're really focused on community well-being. And in half the country, they are red, and they are probably Christian. But what they really care about is the people in their community and the beautiful place they live in. And that 30% knows how to have these conversations. And they know how to begin to have them at the school board and at the firms and on the Economic Development Commission. And they start reaching out to the other side. And they say, you blue people, we think you're kind of nuts. And can we talk about that, please? And in my dream, you can agree to disagree because what you care about is this organization or this school or this place. You care about that more than being right on every single issue. And I think I have a friend who says he calls it a world full of super regulators, people who can listen and hold. I hear how angry you are. I hear what's happened. God, I sound like no one here from California, and if you are, my apologies, but I sound like, my joke about being Californian when I grew up, which is, I hear how you feel. But that's what we need. I hear how you feel, and I am willing to give up power or share resources because I feel that. So yeah. And we'd have tons of dance and music and art and connection, and it would be cool. Yeah. On that note, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your insights, hope, and most of all, love. So on behalf of the Graduate School Alumni Association, this is a small token of appreciation, and thanks so much for spending time with us. Greatly appreciated it.
Thank you so much for listening and for being here. If anything I said has interested you or you would like to follow up, I will post some resources to the website, but feel free to send me an email. I answer my email. I'd be happy to share the syllabus of the course. I'm launching a podcast. I'm launching a Substack. Any way I can support you, please let me know. Thanks very much.
Thank you again.
And thank you for this. Wonderful. Thank you.